audio, mommy.
Hello,
Zoom in.
good evening. Oh, camera. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to PSEG's Social Impact Film Series, Standing in Solidarity. My name is Donna Walker-Kuhn. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm Senior Advisor, Social Impact at NJPAC. I'm brown skinned, I have shoulder-length locks, although it's up in a bun, and have on glasses and a white and black sweater. This evening, we are pleased to present a continued conversation about affordable housing. The theme is a roof over every head. Last January of 2025, we presented this topic, and it was our most highly attended discussion. We knew that this topic needed to be further discussed and that's what we're doing this evening. I hope each of you received the link to the PSEG social impact film, Gentrification and Displacement. It's a PBS documentary series exploring the impact of discriminatory laws on the country's housing crisis. To maximize our time for an in-depth conversation, we decided that we would want to make sure you get the link in advance so we can have more time to hear from our wonderful panel. We are extremely fortunate and deeply appreciative to have this event curated by Amol Sinha, Executive Director of ACLU New Jersey. Thank you, Amol, for curating a dynamic expert panel that I know will leave our audience with information that they can take action on. This social justice series is part of our Standing in Solidarity initiative. The purpose of this series is to bring our community together and to encourage everyone to take part in the movement to ensure civil rights for all. On our website, you can find archived prior social justice panel discussions, as well as resources that will help you to take action. We're also happy to have as our advisors Newark NAACP, the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, Newark Arts, the Africana Institute at Essex County College, Asian American Arts Alliance, and of course, ACLU New Jersey. Our newest advisors are Newark Office of Film and Television and our curator, Eyes Like Mine. NJPAC would like to offer a land acknowledgement. The language we're using was created with consultation and guidance from Chief Dwayne Perry of the Rampopo-Munsee Lenape tribe and Oleana Whispering Dove of the Eastern Salagi Algonquin descendants. We're grateful to them for their generosity, wisdom, and labor to craft these words. We, the Lenape, original benefactors of land once ripened and cultivated with attentiveness to the Creator and her ascendancy, express everlasting gratitude to our Creator for the traditional, ancestral jurisdictions of the Munsee, Esopus, Canarsie, Capsea, Ripperoi, Siwanoy, Weekasqueak, jointly today known as the Rampopo and Natakote Lenni Lenape. Let this land acknowledgement be the beginning of our return to unity. Let us be guardians of the water, the air, the earth, the four-legged, the flyers, the swimmers, the crawlers, the mammal people, and the green. Let us now stand lifting our humanity and rapturing with Earth's consciousness as guardians of harmony and kindness. I would like to thank our corporate sponsor. Since 2014, PSEG and the PSEG Foundation have partnered with NJPAC to pair screenings of socially engaged films with thoughtful talks featuring activists, artists, academics, journalists, and other experts. We're extremely grateful for their ongoing support. This year, we have added a wonderful additional component to our Standing in Solidarity series, and that is poetry. There will be a poetry reading now in partnership with Dodge Poetry. We will hear from poet Maya X, City of Newark's inaugural Poet Laureate. And just a little bit about Maya. She's a host and producer of People's Open Mic, where she holds space for poets and artists. She's self-published her collection of poetry. She's the organizer of Hug the Block. She's an amazing poet, and we're delighted to have her. Maya, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Mia X. Hey y'all. Greetings. I have a couple things to share. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you for the invite. I hope you can hear me okay. This first piece is called Let's Talk. Let's talk, let's share, let's co-create care. We need a bigger tent, but where? A bigger tent where we face this life, this world's challenges together. We can't fix what we won't face. Can we trust what we don't create? Let's take this time to talk and share. Let's co-create care. We need a bigger tent, y'all. Where? We need to chat about our food, discuss our neighborhoods, the land's well-being in our hands, worth greater than dollars that don't make sense. Let's talk. Let's share. Let's co-create care. We need a bigger tent, but where? Here we gather, share power, assert ourselves, our truth, co-creating magic with our youth in mind, our planet at heart, mental health enhancing, making space using art and action, collaborating, impacting, minimizing distractions. Let's talk. Let's share. Let's co-create care. We need a bigger tent, but where? A tent busting at the seams, adjusting to fit dreams, trusting what it means to build this thing together, listening, witnessing, passion glistening across faces, empathy from places far beyond, near, close to what embraces our dark times, our light, our plight in our workplaces, transparency inherently absent when our communication is in fragments. How do we trust each other? Let's talk. Let's share. Let's co-create care. We need a bigger tent, but where? Let's ring the bell, sound the alarm. It's time. It's time to pitch this bigger tent now. Why? Because our dreams matter. The brightness in our stars. We can't wait to witness, see the sharing, the co-creating, the figuring out. You and me time is now. It's time to figure it out, to plan it out, to measure it out and build it out so we can wake up under it together with encouragement, recognition, leadership, healing, truly connected to each other's values, vision, committed to what this means to be together. See, I want you in my tent. We can talk about the sky. When I trust you with my energies, we can answer the deeper whys. So let's talk. Let's share. Let's create a bigger tent in here. That's one. You can snap. That's let's talk. I feel like it just begins the conversation. And I'm a Newark girl at heart from Irving Turner Boulevard. My mother was the candy lady, and I have 3 children, Till, Boaz, and Orchid. So this is for them. I promised them I would say their name on Zooms more. They, the kids. So these are haiku, really quick. Candy lady's child, raised on promises and grind, becoming more now. Cracked bricks lay open, eyes focused on future days, roots ready for light. And the final one. Till, Boaz, Orchid, American dream growing, wildfire dignified. Thank you so much for listening. This dream is important to me. This affordable housing thing. Yes, thank you for your snaps. I accept all your snaps. Cheers to a wonderful conversation. Thank you for having me. And I'm just excited to hear and move forward and take some steps, so I too can accomplish this American dream. Thank you all. I love you. Shout out to our mayor. Thank you, City of Newark. Thank you, Arts and Culture. Thank you, NJ Pack. Thank you, everybody. It's love, love, love.
Thank you so much. Wow, those were incredible and so apropos of the theme for today. Really appreciate that. So now I am more than delighted and honored to present our moderator for this evening's panel. Amol Sinha is a nationally recognized civil rights leader who has dedicated his career to advancing racial justice, holding institutions accountable, promoting and defending rights and liberties, and spearheading impactful work to protect our democracy. As executive director of the ACLU of New Jersey, Amol guides the organization's innovative integrated advocacy work, utilizing litigation, policy, public education, and strategic communications to build a more equitable society. During Amol's tenure, the ACLU New Jersey has appeared before the New Jersey Supreme Court more times than any non-governmental party, deepened community partnerships across the state, and centered the experiences of directly impacted communities. Amol's work has been tremendous, and we're so pleased that he continues to find time in his busy schedule to curate these important conversations for New Jersey Performing Arts Center. Thank you, Amol, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Donna. Good evening, everyone. First of all, a big thank you to NJPAC for hosting these crucial conversations. And thank you to the whole team that makes this possible. I know that there's a lot going on and there's a lot of moving parts, and it's a very dynamic process. So I deeply appreciate everybody that makes these events possible. The words of Mia X are resonating with me right now. She said, let's co-create care. That's powerful. That's something that I hope we can see and achieve in this world that is increasingly polarized and feels like it's lacking care, especially for the most vulnerable. And so tonight's conversation is about care. It's about a roof over every head, which is inherently about caring for one another. And it's a conversation about the affordable housing crisis. I appreciate the NJPAC team and the panelists and all those who are attending right now for quickly pivoting to a virtual format given the recent snow and the frigid temperatures that we're experiencing across New Jersey right now. And I was talking to my colleague earlier, Dewan Norwood, who you'll hear from today, and he reminded me that there's nothing that brings stark relief to the need for stable and permanent and safe housing, quite like extreme weather events. So my heart goes out to anyone who had to bear the cold and the snow and continues to have to bear the cold in challenging life circumstances. And we're thinking about you as we're having this conversation. And look, in New Jersey, we just got through this historic election season, and we now have a new governor. And one of the refrains that we heard during the campaign trail was that this election is all about affordability. There's an affordability crisis in New Jersey. We heard that we need New Jersey to be more affordable. Okay, I hear that, right? I hear it. And Mia X, she said, once again, let's co-create care. And she profoundly asked, and I hope I wrote this down right. She profoundly asked, we need a bigger tent, but where? So I suppose the question that comes to mind for me when I hear about affordability from politicians and lawmakers is affordable for whom? In which communities? Who is it that we're thinking about when we're talking about making New Jersey more affordable? Is it immigrant families who are fearful of being separated? Is it the formerly incarcerated who are readjusting to life on the outside? Is it homeless New Jerseyans who don't have a place to go at night, especially when it's frigid outside? And what does affordability really mean? So, in this conversation, we're going to explore some of those themes and much more in the context of housing. And access to housing is indeed an economic justice issue. It's a question about who gets to afford New Jersey and the world. But it's also a racial justice issue. We can't think about access to housing and affordability without thinking about race, because these things, socioeconomic status and race, are inextricably intertwined in our society. And in New Jersey, where we're experiencing one of the worst racial wealth gaps in the nation, I think it's all the more important that we surface issues of racial justice when we're having conversations. So we have a tremendous panel, and I'm going to introduce each person who's participating on the panel one by one. And as I name them, I would like for them to uh, uh, come on camera and unmute themselves and tell us a little bit about their organizations. So I'm going to start with Reverend Eric Dobson. Eric Dobson is the leader of the United Black Agenda. He wears many hats, but Rev Dobson, I'd love to hear from you about what your organization does.
Thank you, Amol, and thank you everyone for joining tonight, and to all my colleagues and panelists on here tonight. So the United Black Agenda is comprised of some of the large civil rights organizations in New Jersey. It was a 501c3. We work to really actively pursue policies and legislation to deal with the ravages of white supremacy. So we work through faith communities, through melanin maternal health, monarch housing, Association of Black Women Lawyers, Alpha Phi Alpha, New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, Salvation for Social Justice, the Black Empowerment Coalition, Urban League of Essex County, Outdoors on Purpose, Fair Share Housing Center, Garden State Bar, ABWL, the Association of Black Women Lawyers, and the state conference NAACP. So our goal and our mission is to reduce the ravages of white supremacy, to pass policies and legislation and programs to mitigate all these things, and to really affirm the tenets of democracy, freedom, and liberty. We are the United Black Agenda. Thank you so much, Amol.
Thank you. Next up, we have Samra Haider, who's the president and CEO of the Dodge Foundation.
Hi, Amol, and thank you everyone for having me. Hard to follow Reverend Dobson and his eloquent way to describe the United Black Agenda, but I represent the Dodge Foundation, Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation. We're a private foundation based in Newark, and we are focused on closing the racial wealth gap in New Jersey. As Amol mentioned, we have one of the worst racial wealth gaps in the country, so Dodge is really focused on strategies that aim to turn that around. And we're particularly focused on cities where the racial wealth gap is most extreme. And that's Newark, Paterson, Trenton, soon to be Camden, and Atlantic City as well.
Thanks so much, Samra. Next up, we have Amber Randolph, who is the Associate Vice President at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation.
Thank you so much, Amol. I'm really thrilled and honored to be here with all of you in this incredible panel. As Amol said, I'm Amber Randolph. I am the Associate Vice President at RWJF. We work both nationally with a strong footprint here in our home state of New Jersey. And we don't really see ourselves as a housing funder, rather a health funder, with a focus on housing as a part of our core commitment to advancing equity and justice and dismantling structural racism in the sectors and systems that have created and perpetuated discrimination and inequities across our state, really since its founding. And this is tied so closely to RWJF's vision to achieve a future where health is a right and not a privilege. And we see affordable housing as an essential component of getting to health equity and prosperity. This work takes a deep level of engagement and a sophisticated ecosystem of actors and leaders. And I'm really thrilled to see so many of the organizations represented on this panel are RWJF grantees and partners, and I'm really excited to hear their insights today and hear from all of those that are participating in the webinar.
Thank you, Amber. Next, we have Adam Gordon, who's the Executive Director of Fair Share Housing Center.
Thanks, Amol, and really excited to be with all you. I wish I could be with you all in person in the great city of Newark. Greetings from our office in Cherry Hill. Fair Share Housing Center has worked for the past 50 years to make sure that every community in New Jersey is open to everyone, everyone from every racial and ethnic background, income, regardless of disability, involvement with the criminal justice system. And through our work enforcing the Mount Laurel Doctrine, we've created over 75,000 affordable homes throughout New Jersey and broken down barriers to people accessing housing based on race, based on income, based on involvement with the criminal justice system. And we are now working to build tens of thousands more homes and continue to break down barriers in every community in our great state.
Great. Next, we have Thaisa Kelly, who's the CEO of Monarch Housing Associates.
Hi, Amol. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this evening with all of you. Monarch Housing Associates, we're an organization, a nonprofit organization that really wants to accomplish the vision of seeing that every person in the state has access to safe, stable, affordable, and supportive housing that meets their needs. So we do this through a couple of different activities. We work with developers to help build and create affordable and supportive housing across the state. And we also work with communities to help develop and implement plans to end homelessness so that we can figure out how to ensure every person has access to the housing. And we also do work in public policy to ensure that we have the resources and the policies in place that make it possible to create housing opportunity and access for everyone. I'm really thrilled to be part of this conversation because, as you can see on the side in our tagline, we do believe at Monarch Housing that housing is a human right, and we want to do everything that we can to make that possible in the state.
Thanks, Thaisa. And last but not least, my colleague, Dewan Norwood, who's policy counsel at the ACLU of New Jersey. And let me say it's his birthday today, so sorry to embarrass you, Dewan, but happy birthday and feel free to unmute.
Thank you so much for the birthday wish and for having me, Amol. My name is Dewan Norwood, and first and foremost, I come to this work as a movement lawyer or a lawyer in service to the movement for liberation of all oppressed peoples, wherever and whenever we may find them. And I come into this work in a sturdy tradition, not only of the countless folks who have contributed to this struggle, but also thanks to three brilliant Black women from the South in particular, who I credit with everything. And that's my great-grandmother, Annie, my grandmother, Alfreda, and my mother, Lisa. I currently have the pleasure of serving as policy counsel at the ACLU of New Jersey, which is leading the fight in the state to not only defend, but to advance civil rights and civil liberties. And we do so in the legal realm, in the policy realm, from the state house to the courthouses. And in that role, I have the pleasure of working across our issue areas, particularly when it comes to racial justice and economic justice. And at the center of that is housing. So grateful to be here for this conversation tonight.
Great. Thanks so much, Dewan. So I'm going to invite everybody to come back up on camera and unmute themselves. And so the way this will work is I'll ask questions directed to particular individuals, but there's a lot of expertise here. So my hope is that this can be as conversational of a conversation as possible, and towards the end we'll have some time for Q&A. And also I'll note that folks, as they were RSVPing for this event, had the opportunity to submit questions, and I'll make sure to weave in some of those questions as we are going through the panel. So my first question is a legal one. It's for Adam, a fellow lawyer. Adam, could you tell us a little bit about the legal landscape on affordable housing in New Jersey? Can you sort of demystify for folks, you mentioned this earlier, but can you demystify for folks what the Mount Laurel Doctrine is? And could you describe the new state law that was passed last year to strengthen it?
Sure. Thank you, Amol. And I'll say I'm a lawyer, but I'm an organizer first. I was an organizer before I was a lawyer, and the whole history of the Mount Laurel Doctrine is about organizers and lawyers working together to make real change in our state. So where does the Mount Laurel Doctrine come from? Well, first, what is it? New Jersey has the strongest requirement of any state in the country that every community has to allow for its fair share of affordable housing. And that comes from a landmark New Jersey Supreme Court case in 1975, which in turn comes from an incredible movement of people in the early 1970s in New Jersey, of organizers, of legal services lawyers, of leaders of organizations like the NAACP that fought displacement in New Jersey. And it's not the kind of displacement that a lot of times we think about today in places like Newark and Jersey City, which are critical issues that we also work on. But it was more rural displacement. It was about Black communities. You don't think about it for all you who are up north, but down here in South Jersey, we're just above the Mason-Dixon line. And a lot of key communities in New Jersey were havens on the Underground Railroad, including in Mount Laurel. And there were 200-year-old Black communities that were being displaced by suburbanization. And there was a movement in Mount Laurel to say, we are not going to stand for this, and our community belongs here. We belong staying here, and literally responded to the mayor of Mount Laurel coming to Jacob's Chapel AME Church, the oldest AME church in our state, and saying, if you people can't afford to live here, you'll just have to leave, and saying, yeah, we're not going to accept that. And we are all going to be at the table. And Mia X's poem, Tree at the Start, I think very much is in the spirit of that and the movement they built. And that led to this landmark 1975 decision that said you can't use zoning in this way. You can't exclude people from communities with zoning. And we were founded at Fair Share Housing Center by the civil rights lawyers, by the leaders, by the organizers. Who started that movement because they understood that just because we won a legal victory, that wasn't the end of the battle. And we've spent the last 50 years relentlessly holding communities to account and making sure we build that housing. And today, more than 400,000 New Jerseyans live in homes that would not be there without the Mount Laurel Doctrine. So it's all over our state. And basically, uh, we in many ways have this strong history, but we are also in many ways still just getting started because the housing needs continue to grow. And we were able to pass this landmark law 2 years ago to finally give real teeth, the strongest law we've passed in this 50-year history. And that has led to over 400 communities complying with the law much more rapidly than we've ever seen in this 50-year history. And it's also led to other states throughout the country, like California, like Florida, like Connecticut, passing laws that learn from us in New Jersey. Really key to this has been really the strong enforcement and strong teeth, which is both legal enforcement, but also organizers. One last thought, as important as the Mount Laurel Doctrine is, it's not enough. We face a massive housing crisis in every community of our state today. And that is why part of what we've done at Fair Share and with a lot of the other people that are part of this discussion is to fight for more change, whether it's passing the Fair Chance and Housing Act, our first statewide law in the country to limit the use of criminal background checks in the housing process, whether it's looking at unconscionable rent increases and unfair evictions, and whether it's other reforms to outdated zoning laws. And so every single person that's part of this panel, especially Reverend Dobson, who's been is a senior special advisor here and has been a colleague for many, many years. And everybody else here has been a part of it. We have so much more work to do for all the challenges all of our communities are facing. And we're very grateful to have this foundation of the Mount Laurel Doctrine to build on.
Thanks so much, Adam. Appreciate that. Thaisa, my next question is for you. You mentioned this phrase as you were doing your introduction, housing is a human right. You are leading a coalition around that work, and you're leading a campaign dedicated to making sure that housing is a human right. Tell us what you mean by that and why it's so important to ensure that housing is recognized as a human right.
Sure. Thank you for that. I think first, before we kind of dig into what it looks like to talk about housing as a human right, it's important to set some foundational elements to this that kind of build the thinking around housing as a human right. So we at Monarch do believe that housing is a human right. And when we say that, we really think it comes down to our understanding of what it means to be a human being and what it means for us to thrive. A foundational element of a human being, and I believe, and we at Monarch believe that every person is put here on this earth for the opportunity to thrive individually and to thrive together. And so in order to make that happen, we have to make sure that we're taking care of the basic needs so that people can begin to thrive. And so when I think about what are the basic needs that people need to take care of before they can even begin to tackle the idea of thriving, it is the fundamental things like having access to air, water, food, and shelter. Housing is one of those core basic needs that people need to have taken care of. And when we are able to take care of people's housing needs, they can move from surviving to thriving. Otherwise, their lives are spent really just trying to survive. And we want to create a space, a state, a country where everybody has the opportunity to thrive. So it's really important, and we believe that it is our collective responsibility to really invest in making sure that housing as a human right is understood as a human right, because we understand that it is a basic need that we have as human beings who are living and walking on this earth. So as an agency, when we talk about housing being a human right, and when we pull together a lot of partners to really discuss what this looks like, first, we are really trying to figure out how to take this from a theoretical framework to a really practical frame that we can implement and see in our daily lives. And for us, that means that we are working to accomplish a couple of things. First, we'd like to see a state amendment that declares in New Jersey, housing is a fundamental human right. Something that acknowledges that every resident of the state deserves access to safe, stable, affordable housing, and that those opportunities are afforded to them no matter what, because they are human beings living in this state. What does that look like on the ground? So for us, I think it really encompasses 3 buckets. One is really looking at housing access. How do we ensure every single resident of the state has access to the housing that fits the housing that they need and that fits their needs most appropriately? This includes looking at how we are working to end homelessness and get people into housing. This includes looking at how we eliminate barriers that people face when trying to get into housing. And, some of that was discussed. Adam mentioned, for example, the work that was done around the Fair Chance in Housing Act. That is wonderful work, but that is work that happened, in 2019, I believe, sometime around there. That's wonderful work, but one of the challenges is that we are still not all on the same page about what access looks like and what access means. And so we still have a far way to go to ensure that people are not blocked from housing opportunities that are available in the communities across the state. So housing access is one bucket. Second bucket is really around housing stability. How do we ensure that people who are in homes, that are in homes across the state, can continue to maintain those homes, can continue to stay in those homes and be safe in those homes? And so that includes some concepts that we haven't fully fleshed out or dealt with in the New Jersey that we have to do some work around, but some of it does include thinking about how we are regulating the housing market. How are we helping to ensure that we have resources to prevent people from losing their homes and prevent people from getting evicted and becoming homeless? How are we empowering tenants, and how are we enforcing housing habitability standards so that every home that people are living in is a quality space that helps them to grow in a healthy way and thrive? And then the final bucket of work that we really kind of are focused on when we talk about housing as a human right is this idea that we need to be investing in the production of more housing that is affordable to every single person at various income levels. There's a lot to be done in that bucket. And I think oftentimes when we talk about housing, a lot of the focus is there, but we do think it is important to look at access, stability, and production, remove barriers that come from like regulatory frameworks like zoning reform, optimize and expand the financing that's available to build housing, and to also really think about who is building housing in our communities and create opportunities for Black and Brown and emerging developers to participate in that work of actually creating the housing that our communities need. I think together, collectively, our hope is that if we can codify all of these things, we can set New Jersey on a path to really creating housing opportunity for everybody and having a state where we're all thriving together.
Thanks so much, Thaisa. We at the ACLU are a proud member of your coalition and supporter of the work of housing as a human right. So we're grateful to be following in your leadership on this crucial issue. Dewan, I want to turn to my colleague here. Dewan, at the ACLU of New Jersey, we've been working on a few priorities at the intersection of housing and economic justice and racial justice. And one of them is about helping those in eviction proceedings, because what we're talking about here is not just about affordable housing in terms of home ownership. We're also talking about renters and tenants as well. So one of the things that we've been working on is creating a right to counsel program for people in eviction proceedings. Can you tell us a little bit about that work and the study that we put out recently, and what the path ahead might look like?
Absolutely. And first off, just want to say, as you said, we are proud members of the Housing as a Human Right Coalition. And Thaisa, those are some of my favorite meetings to be on because it really highlights the importance of this work in framing the conversation. Amol, you're correct at the beginning in saying that this is a conversation about care, but it's also a conversation about power. So much of the discussion around housing and the discriminatory practices that we've seen in housing have a lot to do with the othering of human beings. To a discussion, creating these stratifications of who's worthy. And in order to see a truly fair and equitable state, we have to do away with those. And so to answer your question, I think it's important to start with a bit of background that across the board, homelessness is on the rise. Including here in New Jersey. And one of the leading causes of homelessness is eviction. You also mentioned the governor's platform during her election campaign was centered around housing and affordability with a focus on home ownership. But, for the reasons that we'll discuss tonight and for the many reasons that are known, there are a lot of barriers that exist in preventing folks from accessing the opportunity to experience home ownership, which, leaves a lot of folks as renters. And so in the year between July 2023 and June of 2024, there were approximately 115,000 eviction cases filed in New Jersey. And while New Jersey does have important tenant protections, those protections aren't fully utilized if tenants don't have access to legal representation. And so an important component of building upon those protections is to secure a tenant right to counsel in eviction actions. And so the ACLU of New Jersey and the Seton Hall Law School Center for Social Justice engaged out, which is a global financial advisory firm, to conduct a cost-benefit analysis on the viability for a statewide tenant right to counsel in New Jersey. And through research, data analysis, and stakeholder engagement, the outcome of the report showed that New Jersey would greatly benefit from a statewide right to counsel, providing guaranteed legal representation to tenants facing eviction. When we published the cost-benefit report in November of last year, and that report found that for every dollar invested in a tenant right to counsel program, the state of New Jersey would see a fiscal benefit between $2.30 and $3.14. Annually, that means that with an investment of $86.8 million, New Jersey could recognize a fiscal benefit between $200 million and up to $272.6 million each year. And these benefits stretch across all aspects of life. And I think that's also a critical part of our conversation, is that housing is truly at the center of everything. And it's something that our opposition knows quite well. And it's evident in the many obstacles and barriers that have been created to prevent access to housing opportunities. These fiscal benefits include millions of dollars related to housing social safety net responses, to health, to employment, to education, to decreases in the criminalization of people experiencing homelessness. And overwhelmingly, implementing a right to counsel program would benefit the state of New Jersey. Even more important than the fiscal aspect is the human impact of implementing that program. In 2023, 97% of tenants facing eviction did not have representation. Meanwhile, and we know that access to legal representation dramatically alters the outcome of cases. Landlords are coming into these eviction proceedings with power and resources to access representation by experienced attorneys who specialize in these matters, while tenants don't have those resources and have access to counsel. Tenants, and it shows in disfavorable outcomes to tenants. Tenants without representation experience a disruptive displacement in about 75 to 85% of all cases, whereas tenants with lawyers avoid disruptive displacement in 80 to 90% of cases. The report estimates that a statewide right to counsel would result in around 40,000 households being represented in eviction actions, which roughly comes out to between 58,000 and 79,000 people avoiding displacement each year. And when we talk about affordability, your point about affordable for whom, we also have to acknowledge that there are deep racial disparities in housing opportunities and in homelessness. Black folks make up 47.4% of the homeless population in New Jersey, while being just 12% of New Jersey's total population. And I'll be candid, we're not having a real conversation about housing if we're not having a conversation on race and racial justice. And so to that end, a tenant right to counsel and eviction actions is crucial to bringing equity and justice to a system with an overwhelming power imbalance that favors landlords.
Power is key, Dewan. Thank you so much for framing that out for us. I mean, one of the things that I learned from you in the process of creating this report was that landlords show up to court with an attorney about 97% of the time, which is almost always. Tenants show up to court with an attorney about 3% of the time, which is almost never. So if we're talking about this from both an economic justice point and a racial justice standpoint, we also have to talk about this from a good governance and judiciary standpoint, because the scales of justice are supposed to be even, but in this instance they are clearly stacked. And so we need to make sure that we're addressing that. And many thanks to Amber and her team at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for helping support the creation of that report, which we hope will pay dividends in New Jersey's legal landscape. But Amber, I want to turn to you now. One of the policy goals of your team, the New Jersey program at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, is to ensure that New Jerseyans have equitable access to affordable housing in their communities. Can you share a little bit more about why that's a goal that will help us achieve health equity?
Thank you, Amol. I'm happy to do that. Before I do that, though, I'm so struck by hearing from Dewan and Thaisa and Adam about these core areas of systems change that are really designed to shift power. I mean, Dewan just talked about, and you just named, the stats, and where that power has really been taken away from communities. And so much of our work at RWJF is about recentering and refocusing that power on communities and those who are closest to the problems and the inequities that persist. So as I said in my intro, at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, we're focused on housing, and it's really grounded in our vision for a future where health is a right and not a privilege. That vision really depends on dismantling the structural racism and other systems that my colleagues just talked about that have long shaped who has access to safe, stable, resilient, affordable housing and who doesn't. We arrived at this goal really based on a few contextual realities, many of them already covered by my colleagues. At a high level, we recognize that housing is inherently place-based in our state and deeply tied to racial equity. So that we see every day the consequences of decades of residential segregation, racialized disinvestment, and where we see those incidents happening, we're also seeing stark differences in health outcomes across neighborhoods. And in recognizing that, we're reckoning with the legacy of overt exclusion and racialized capitalism in our state. It's come in the form of redlining. Thaisa talked about zoning, exclusionary zoning, and other forms of disinvestment have really made that right to stable housing much more difficult and far out of reach for Black, Latina, immigrant communities, and other marginalized people in our state, just driving the gaps and widening the health gaps. We also recognize that housing is intersectional. When we think about multi-sector approaches, intersectional approaches, we recognize those have to be pursued in tandem. This group on this call represents a real intersectional group of actors who are coming together, but are also bringing in and working across sectors with other aspects of healthy communities. How do we think about transit, jobs, access to care, economic development, climate came up earlier, climate resilience. And so when we think about the impact structural racism has had across sectors, and everything, again, from credit access, employment, second chance, our criminal justice system, or the incarceration system, we recognize more people of color are renting versus owning. We heard some stats just now. People are spending more than half their income, particularly people of color, on housing, which is an unsustainable reality. And they're routinely, as Dewan just said, denied help when they're facing housing instability. And so we think about who are the orgs and infrastructure that can support these residents who are facing housing instability, but we also recognize they're woefully underfunded, they're not well resourced, and so their effectiveness is not nearly as high as it could be. And lastly, when we think about how we got to these goals, we think about what are the most effective approaches that a private philanthropy like the Robert Wood Johnson need to think about, need to invest in to achieve and support equitable housing. And we see that really, again, as building and bridging power to communities, lifting up policy practice and systems change at all levels, from the neighborhood and local level, the regional and the state level, and then thinking more importantly about how do we central and elevate resident leadership, civic engagement, community power, so that housing decisions, the next set of policies, and housing decisions, and even when we think about our own decision making, are informed and centered based on community voice and input. Those who are most impacted by structural racism and housing instability. And so when we think about all of these contextual realities, we're really committed to eliminating as many housing related barriers through the work of partners on the screen and those that are in the virtual Zoom room. And so I want to just highlight a couple of areas where we're seeing our goals in action through the range of tools that we're using at the foundation. It goes beyond grant making. It includes impact investments. It includes our convening power, using our power and privilege and our voice as appropriate, using our research and other tools. So really bringing as much as we can to the housing needs in our state. A couple of quick examples and then I'll move on. We recognize, and Thaisa mentioned this, we have a crisis in our state. We need more production. We need to preserve what's existing, focus on long-term affordability, and produce more units that are safe, accessible, and in vibrant communities. And so when we think about that, we think about the necessitation of supporting smaller and emerging BIPOC developers who have the on-the-ground knowledge and know how to get this work and work in their communities and build and gain the trust of their communities. And that's a lot of the work that Monarch is doing with their BIPOC developer collective under Thaisa's leadership. Another core way this goes in action is promoting racially equitable land use and zoning, like the work that Fair Share just described through the Mount Laurel implementation, and ensuring that every municipality, as Adam said, is doing their fair share. Lastly, I want to lift up that when we think about supporting innovative approaches to this work, there's so much innovation around community. I see some of this in the chat, community ownership, other ways of thinking about ownership, what it means to own real estate and own land, but also one of our core goals is around tenant protections. And so we're really proud that we were able to support the tenant right to counsel work that Dewan just talked about and Amol just talked about, because we see that as essential for all the reasons that were just explained, but really stabilizing neighborhoods, but at the same time advancing individual and community wealth building, keeping people stably housed, preventing displacement, and really keeping predatory and discriminatory actors out of the way. And so we see all of this work as core to our goals. And we see progress. It's embedded and embodied on this call. We recognize more needs to be done. And we really want to figure out in partnership, how do we continue to do more, standing in our belief that health equity, we can't get there without housing stability, affordability, and choice. Hopefully that helps them all.
That's great. Thank you so much, Amber. Samara, I want to turn to you. In recent years, the Dodge Foundation has adopted a new strategy that's focused on addressing the racial wealth gap. And that includes a particular focus on housing. I guess my question for you is, why is that a key priority in addressing the racial wealth gap, and how did the Dodge Foundation come to that?
Yeah, and first of all, like echoing what everyone says, a lot of what's been said is kind of informing Dodge's strategy. But when we looked at why there's such a large racial wealth gap in New Jersey, there's no way around the fact that home ownership is a huge driver of that. So just for an example, prior to COVID, the gap was about 300,000. After COVID, it jumped to 640,000, primarily driven by home values increasing in New Jersey. So like, if we don't grab onto this and figure out what's happening, it's just going to start to run away from everyone. But one of the things we also saw, and why we can't, and we aren't just thinking of our strategy as a home ownership strategy alone, is that yes, there's a huge gap, but Black and Latino families are hovering at around 20,000 in wealth, which means forget the gap. the gap's there, but why are we seeing so many people persistently very close to poverty or living in poverty or living adjacent to poverty? So for Dodge, our strategy, one of our primary strategies is around housing choice and really thinking about everything everyone's talked about. We have to first make sure people are stably housed, making sure they're not getting evicted. Once they're housed, how do we make sure that's affordable, that they can actually live their lives in the homes they either rent, and then get on a pathway, if that's what they choose, to home ownership. And that has to happen by making everything about their lives more affordable. So while we have a housing choice strategy, our secondary strategy is also around economic mobility, and they're both so intertwined. So for instance, Amber mentioned it, just the cost burden, renter cost burden homes, in New Jersey, about 42% of renters are cost burden, but in the Dodge's target cities, that's closer to 50%. So we're thinking of someone's income, and the drag of rent on that income is really significant, and that just makes saving for anything, let alone buying a home, that much more difficult. So we're just seeing the way these two strategies really intertwine. And again, like everyone said, it takes a lot, and you really have to think about it on a continuum. And there's a lot of dynamics at play. I said when this panel came up that I'm so happy to be around so many experts, because it's really complicated. Building affordable housing, thinking about these new models of rent to own, social housing, there's a lot that goes into it. And so I'm just really inspired by the work in New Jersey, and Dodge, I think, really wants to continue to focus, similar to what Amber said, on just ways that as a foundation, we have access to sometimes more flexible capital. Certainly we can't build housing just full stop because we don't have that much money, but there's ways that we're trying to think about where is there friction in the current landscape, in the current market of either development of affordable housing, or other aspects of piloting new ideas, that Dodge can think about both their grant dollars and their endowment dollars to sort of push new ideas or remove some barriers, particularly for BIPOC developers or nonprofit developers to build affordable housing.
Well, thank you so much, Summer. I want to shift a little and talk now about politics. One of the many hats that Reverend Dobson wears is political operative. And so I would love to hear from you, Rev, about the political issues at play. As we know, policy and politics are inextricably intertwined, and the work of affordable housing has political considerations as well. So in your experience in advocating for the affordable housing law that we talked about that strengthened Mount Laurel, you were essential to that process. In your experience, what were some of the political implications that you were grappling with? And this is perhaps a facetious question, but was it easy to get past, or were there roadblocks along the way?
Well, that's a loaded question, though. But thank you for asking that question, and thank you for all the other panelists. Of what you guys were saying were amazing. And I got to tell you, this is one of the most lively chats. I mean, I'm reading some of the questions in the chat. It's pretty amazing. If I think about it honestly, I would have to say that it wasn't easy, and it wasn't inevitable. That's for sure. Adam can attest to that as we work together on this policy. The laws passed because of pressure, legal clarity, organizing, and political consequences made inaction harder to sustain. So that's some of the work that Adam and I, when he talked about organizing, we were organizing at the highest levels, working to get this policy passed. So housing policy doesn't just move simply because the needs are obvious or it's a more argument is strong. It moves when the cost of doing nothing becomes too high. And that's what we set out to do during that campaign. So, even when we pass legislation, there's only part of the story. New Jersey, especially housing, is shaped by as much as state and local politics is by statute. So, while this law represents real progress, it also exposes an ongoing tension between what we say we value and how power actually operates on the ground. So we know about, someone in the chat mentioned NIMBYism. So we know about local control. We know about the tension that exists, and it shows up clearly at the local level. Home rule is often described as a neutral principle, but in practice, it functions as a cultural norm in New Jersey that allows delay, resistance at the local level. So this law itself is great law, and the incentives are there, but that's why implementation matters more than celebration. And I want to be clear about that. This is something that I have to applaud the folks at Fairshire Housing Center. I'm a former deputy director. I'm no longer employed, but they're one of my greatest partners as we continue to do this work. The staff at Fairshire Housing Center, the lawyers who just been going crazy making sure this law is implemented. And that's the real test, isn't whether we can pass a law, is whether we're willing to confront how it plays out at the municipal level, municipality by municipality. So this is one of the reasons why United Black Agenda perspective on this issue is pushing policies that will allow to get at some of the shortage, over 200,000 units, and the politics around this is really critical. Again, dealing with this NIMBYism and how power shifts. The United Black Agenda is really focused on getting at these zoning barriers, right? And so we're looking at how do we allow faith institutions to build affordable housing on property that they already own, and bypass some of these certain local zoning barriers. These institutions already serve the community at scale. They're trusted, they're rooted in accountability. Yet we make it extraordinarily difficult for them to respond to housing crisis because local control becomes a place where progress stalls. Now, this isn't about undermining local government, but it's about recognizing where structural barriers live and being honest about how they function. So the hard truth in housing shortage persists not because we lack good policy ideas, but because solving them often conflicts with the political incentives that govern local decision-making. So passing laws is a victory, implementing it is a test of power, and housing is where the test keeps showing up time after time after time. So of course there's political risk, because when you look at the folks that you're working with, the folks that you're entrusting to do the things that are important to do, sometimes it's not about the moral issue. Sometimes it's not about the economic issue. Is really applying enough pressure where doing nothing causes more tension than to do something about it. And so that's something that, all of us on this panel, all of us in the chat, all of us in New Jersey who care about this issue of housing, who's concerned about why, young people can't afford to put money down in a home, we have to apply that pressure and be clear about this. And I'm going to say this and shut up. And be clear about this. Sometimes power shift when we're not even recognizing it. And that's where sometimes in the advocacy space, and let me just put it on me, sometimes, you lose that focus because you're passing good laws, but power has already shifted. And Adam knows this, to try to undermine what you've already done. And we know that at the national level, I don't want to get into all that, but this is where we have to be clear-minded that power shifts underneath our feet sometimes, like sand, and we're not even recognize it. So I'll stop there. Sorry.
Appreciate that so much. And you said implementation is more important than celebration. That's powerful, for sure. And, the follow through, right? Celebrating the win is one thing, but the follow through, the organizations that are actually doing the work on the ground, making sure that we're holding lawmakers accountable to their word, that they're going to actually do the thing that they were supposed to do. That's where it can all fall apart. And so you can't just go wide, you got to go deep too. And I appreciate that. So you talked a little bit about local politics, Reverend Dobson, but I want to bring in Adam and Thaisa into this as well. Let's talk more about that. Some municipalities are pushing back against their obligations to comply with Mount Laurel, and they've always done that, right? Like since the doctrine was started, they've pushed back on it. But there's a renewed pushback as a result of the law that was recently passed. What are their arguments? Why is it that they are saying they don't want to build affordable housing in their communities? And what are some of the solutions that you can explain to us?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of the arguments are the same arguments they've been using for 50 years. I think, it's not really polite, especially in the realities that people are facing. And in reality, a lot of these elected officials' constituents are facing that they can't afford the rent and that, they're underwater in their mortgages. So they don't say, well, we don't want affordable housing. They say, it's too much, or, we don't like this proposal. but we also don't like that proposal. We don't think the affordable housing should be, it's too much if you mixed it in with middle class housing because we don't want to build middle class housing. But if you just build affordable housing, that's segregating people for just affordable housing. There's a way that like they sort of object to like whatever you're doing when at the reality is they don't want it. And so then actually a comment that stuck with me from one of my colleagues recently is that I think like much in our country, it's become more polarized recently. There's more, and what Reverend Dobson was just talking about in the politics, it's interesting is that there's more support because there's more communities that aren't fighting it, including communities that historically were. I mean, I'm sitting in Cherry Hill right now, and like Cherry Hill was like our arch nemesis for decades, and for the last decade, they actually have worked in really incredible ways to advance affordable housing, to advance racial justice. First community in the entire state to require Black history as a high school graduation requirement, and that would have been unthinkable in Cherry Hill decades ago. But conversely, you see these people, you probably read the headlines about this coalition led by Montvale that's suing. Like they sue everything that moves. I mean, they just bring, they lose one case and then so they bring another case. I just learned the other day they sued the Housing and Mortgage Finance Agency because they said that they did regulations too early related to this new affordable housing law. But then they just brought another lawsuit when they then followed up and did the permanent regulations. So you have these kinds of extreme resistance. And then yet again, I think about our history and the people who started this. There used to be these mayors originally in Mount Laurel that would come together, and there was a conference room with racist cartoons at the Mount Laurel Township building, and they would all come down and like meet and plot against it. And so in some sense, it's the same story we've always had. But overall, I think there's a lot of municipalities that are cooperating with the process and that see, given the overall massive needs that we have, that there's a path forward. And that's some of what Reverend Dobson was saying about this new law. What's different about this is like it used to be in many cases, this was years of litigation. And a lot of mayors, there's a clear path. It says, look, if you come up with a plan that meets the law and you choose how you're going to do it, and that can, include opportunities, although still we're not seeing enough of it to partner with emerging Black and Brown developers. It can include, partnerships with community-based nonprofits. It could you figure out how to do it, but you don't get just to say we're not going to do it. And we're seeing a lot more towns do that and do that more quickly than we've ever done before. But there still is this small group that's really fighting it. And to wrap up, I mean, I think back to some of the stuff Amber was talking about before. I mean, I just feel like part of what communities are seeing is the overall connection of housing to everything else, to health outcomes, to education outcomes, to labor mobility. You have a major employer in your community, and they're saying it is bad for us that people can't work here and live here. And so there's more and more people who are being persuaded by those arguments and understand that affordable housing actually builds stronger communities for everybody. And yet there's still that core of people who are just going to fight whatever you're going to do. And so it's really important in our enforcement work that we have pathways for both. We work with the communities that want to do a good job and try to help them make connections and actually do something that's actually going to reform their zoning laws and create housing. But if you're going to litigate, we're going to be there litigating with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Against you.
Aisa, please.
I would just, everything that Adam said, but, just add, when we think about the opposition that we see around building affordable housing in communities, I do think it is something where we all have to kind of take a look at how we approach this and what our beliefs are around it. Because at the core of it is this idea that some people are worthy to live in communities and other people are not. I think Dewan mentioned this. There is this core at the base of the argument, whatever the argument is, and we see lots of different iterations of the argument, but what it comes down to is this idea that we don't want some people living in some communities for whatever reason. And so we know that that is tied to race. We know that is tied to class. we know that is tied to so many stereotypes about the other person and what will happen in communities when the other moves in. So we do have to confront that. When the work was happening around getting this legislation passed, and I remember sitting in some of the state hearings and hearing some of the arguments about why this law was a terrible law and was going to, destroy New Jersey. A lot of what I heard was this concept that requiring communities to build affordable housing was going to change the character of their neighborhoods. The reality is New Jersey is a state of 9 million people and growing. The character of our communities has to change. 50 years ago, I could not live in certain communities in this state. There's still some communities in this state that I would not be welcome in now. From my perspective, I don't want to maintain that character. I don't want to maintain that community the way it was. We have to start to see change because New Jersey is growing and changing. Our population is evolving. And that change comes with opportunities for more folks to have choice of where they want to live. So I welcome that change because I know that that means that more people like me and others who are in marginalized positions have more access to communities of opportunity, communities, and choice of where they live. From my perspective, I'm not so concerned about maintaining character. We need to change the character of some of our communities. We need to change the looks of our communities. And even from a perspective around, this concept of our, beautiful suburban communities, with the white picket fence, the reality is in a state of 9 million plus people and growing, it is going to have to look different. We have to have a place for every person to live. So we're not going to be able to maintain the beautiful farms or the beautiful, suburban communities in every aspect or every corner of the state. And so we have to begin to grapple with the idea that we need to change what our communities and what our state looks like. So that's one piece. I do think it takes a collective responsibility on all of us. And I think this has been raised, and I think Reverend Dobson mentioned this. The idea of home rule is a really big impediment to our ability to build the housing that's necessary in the state. It is an unspoken, unwritten, or maybe not unspoken, unwritten rule. There's no law in the state that gives towns the authority to have so much power over what is built, but it is kind of this unspoken agreement that we have between the state government and local government. We have to start to examine that. And I think that we are in a space where the housing crisis is such that we have to begin to be prepared to talk about statewide rules that bypass local zoning. If we're talking about affordable housing, we need to be prepared to fast track the development of affordable housing. When you're talking about building housing, there are a couple of things that make building housing expensive. One is, of course, the materials and prices are going up, but a big expense for a lot of developers who are trying to create affordable housing is the amount of time it takes. A project that, if it was market rate, could be going up in 12 months, takes 2 to 3 years if you're talking affordable housing and getting through all of the approvals and processes that are required in the state. That time translates into money. That is what makes affordable housing, one of the many things that makes affordable housing so difficult to build. And so we need to find a way to fast track the ability to create that housing. And that means that we have to be prepared to talk about statewide laws and regulations and processes that fast track and bypass so that we can get to the end goal of creating affordable housing. And I do want to clarify, when I say affordable housing, I am not talking only about affordable housing that we see today, but talking about housing that is affordable at every single price point.
Thank you so much, Aisa. And perhaps this doesn't need to be said because I think it was implicit in your remarks, but when people use that racially coded language, right, what they're saying is, let's keep our communities white. And that's, I think something that perhaps we need to make explicit in these conversations when we're talking about the pushback that we receive. I apologize a little bit for my voice, and you'll see me drinking tea. I was hoarse the other day and still getting back from it. Uh, Dewan and Thaisa, I want to pull you both into this. We just talked about municipalities and one argument about why it is that they are that they are not that they are pushing back on building affordable housing. Another thing that we've witnessed municipalities doing is trying to pass these ordinances that leave people vulnerable, leave particularly already vulnerable people more vulnerable, and that's specifically around the population that's unhoused. Can you describe a little bit about what you're seeing in certain municipalities and what we're doing to push back? Dewan, we can start with you and we can go to Thais after that.
Thais, please feel free if you want to go ahead.
No, you can start first. It's fine.
Okay. Yeah. This is one of those issues that quickly struck me. Is I personally believe that one of the greatest indictments of a society is the way you treat the most vulnerable. And shortly after I joined the ACLU of New Jersey, it came to our attention that the city of Paterson was preparing to hear and vote on an anti-camping ordinance that would subject folks to fines of up to $2,000 and imprisonment of up to 90 days in jail if passed, which effectively criminalizes the unhoused population of the city. On its face, the ordinance would only accomplish the goal of punishing and criminalizing individuals on the basis of their poverty and housing status. And for context, this was January of last year. And as we gathered at the city council meeting to express our opposition, New Jersey was experiencing extreme weather conditions, just as we are right now. But New Jersey was experiencing extreme weather conditions with temperatures well below freezing and wind chills below zero. And I think that backdrop only further showcased how inhumane this approach is to addressing homelessness. In fact, in preparing, I was reading the statements from city officials, and one city official made the argument that, quote, these folks just want to be out here. They want to make us look bad. And it is unconscionable to think that in those types of conditions, anyone would choose to be outside, or that they have, making a city look bad on their list of priorities. But when it comes to the criminalization of homelessness, the research is clear that criminalizing homelessness is the most expensive and least effective way to address homelessness. And again, it's just unconscionable to propose that meeting individuals in need with a bed in a jail cell rather than a bed through stable housing and shelter options, which is really the dichotomy there. And, it was in that meeting, there was a massive turnout of the community that I was really heartened by. And I think it's something ongoing that has really resonated with me and stuck with me throughout this work. And being in New Jersey is the way folks in Paterson showed up that night. And they were clear in their message in the face of city officials talking about these people. Again, back to this, idea of othering that we've been, touching on throughout this conversation. Folks in Paterson showed up and said, our neighbors, these are our people. And that matters. That people power matters. That collective responsibility amongst a community matters. And in the face of such, of this turnout and opposition, the city council ended up pulling the ordinance. We were able to then continue in conversations with city officials about alternative methods of addressing homelessness, particularly through providing shelter. And shout out to, the organizations in Paterson like DLM Paterson and many others who do the work in terms of housing and homelessness for creating the Paterson Housing Alliance that continues to meet regularly to address those issues in Paterson. But it's a trend that we've seen. A few months later, it happened in Summit, and where we saw a similar anti-camping ordinance that came up. And in the same way that folks had in Paterson, folks showed up in Summit, and we were in Summit until well after 2 a.m. Testifying in opposition to this ordinance. Our remarks went from good evening to good morning because that was just the turnout that we saw. And I think an important piece of background is the fact that in 2024, the Supreme Court really made way for these anti-homelessness, anti-camping ordinances in its decision in Grants Pass v. Johnson. And there the Supreme Court gave all of its reasons for deciding that, the criminalization of homelessness is okay. They made the argument that they were discussing conduct and not status, that they received that the ordinance criminalizing camping was about conduct and not status. And that's just one of those creative things that this Supreme Court uses to like pretend it's not a Dred Scott court and pretend as though they aren't actually invested in the project of perfecting slavery. But when it comes to the Grants Pass decision, the Supreme Court said, we're not the body. They got away from it. They also used the excuse of, we're not the body that should be determining nationwide housing policy. And so, and with that, there are two key takeaways from the Grants Pass decision. One, since they're going to pass this down, since they say that this is an issue for the states, that means that the state of New Jersey has to say, we are not going to do that here. We are not going to make way for the criminalization of homeless populations, and that we are going to stand up for vulnerable populations. And the second takeaway for municipalities across the state is simple, that just because the Supreme Court said that you can, doesn't mean that you should. And so, if we're going to, and again, it does not address these root causes. By penalizing people through fines and imprisonment, you are only further exacerbating the problems and the issues that contribute to, the homelessness that we see across the state. And so we have to be comprehensive, and they have to be, these policies have to be rooted in care and humanity.
And Dewan, you covered a lot of it, and thank you so much for that. And I would just add one or two things. One, I want to just highlight that, since that Supreme Court decision and the ruling that said that it was okay for communities to move forward with criminalizing homelessness, we did see a flurry of municipalities in the state of New Jersey introduce ordinances. Some of them got them passed, some of them repealed them under public pressure. But one thing I want to do make clear for folks is that in a lot of cases, those ordinances, the language that was written was a template that they were using, that they were getting from somewhere. So we do need to be aware and recognize that not all of these actions are specifically New Jersey-born actions. There are national templates that are floating around on certain pieces of legislation at municipal levels that are being pushed in our communities in our state that we don't even realize at times. The other thing I want to point out on this is that, as Dewan mentioned, implementing ordinances that criminalize homelessness, and I do want to be clear because I think oftentimes when we say this, folks push back and say, well, there's nothing in there that says it's illegal to be homeless. If you make it illegal for a person to sleep outside when they have no other option, you are criminalizing their existence. So implementing those types of ordinances do not put people on a path to housing stability and to regaining housing. We have seen in some cases across the state, speaking as of, I think the last time I looked at the numbers and heard the numbers, this was back in December of 25, there have been individuals that have been ticketed in excess of $8,000 for minor infractions, being outside, loitering, being in a public space, trespassing, because they are experiencing homelessness. And just think about that. If you're experiencing a housing crisis and you're unable to pay for housing, how are you going to pay for these fines? And if you're unable to pay for these fines, you're likely going to be ending up in jail at some point because you are not paying, meeting your responsibility to pay the debt. While we know that landlords cannot prevent a person from, or should not be screening out tenants based on criminal history or criminal background, it still does happen. So those things do come back and make it much harder for people to access housing when they are at a space to actually be prepared to move into housing. And the other piece the last piece I want to highlight and leave with us all to think about is those laws around criminalizing homelessness are based on some really false assumptions. They're based on the assumption that, one, people have a choice of where they go and they choose to stay on the street. The reality is, in many cases, people do not have another choice. Our shelter systems are often operating at 90% capacity, and there is no space in the inn for people to go to. And then in other cases, people don't qualify because they must be connected to mainstream benefits, be eligible for welfare or some other program in order to access shelter. So not all of our shelters in the state are accessible to every person who's experiencing a housing crisis, which means the only option for them is oftentimes to sleep on the street or in their car. If we make it illegal for them to sleep in those places, we are making it illegal for them to exist in our state and really pushing the issue outside of our municipal borders, but not really addressing the issue in terms of helping them to get stable housing. So we do need to recognize that we have a complicated homeless service system that is not easy to navigate and sometimes not accessible. And those criminalization laws don't work well hand in hand with a system that is not accessible.
Absolutely. And these are some of the ways in which we facilitate mass incarceration in our countries through the fines and fees that pile up and result in people in prison through through really no fault of their own as a result of the conditions and the circumstances that they found themselves in. Excuse me. I want to turn to Samra and Amber. You both are leaders in philanthropy in New Jersey, and of course, philanthropy has a role to play. However, philanthropy can't be the solution to failed policy, right? There's got to be more, but certainly philanthropy plays a crucial role. And both of your foundations, as you stated, are leading in finding creative solutions and ways to invest in affordable housing. Can you describe some of those creative projects that you are investing in? Samra, we could start with you at the Dodge Foundation.
Sure. And I would say we certainly want to fund the groups that are doing the great housing policy work. So that's first and foremost to make sure that we're not forgetting about them. But yeah, we've been thinking about kind of what Thaisa mentioned, just like how complex and how long it takes to get affordable housing into development. And so we're looking at, in that chain, is there an area where Dodge can focus on? And we've seen kind of this pre-construction time where it's very expensive. The cost of capital is super expensive, particularly for folks who want to keep things affordable. So what we're trying to think about is whether we can utilize our endowment to help some of those providers, access that capital, or provide a guarantee on a bank loan, and then the interest that the bank would have charged, provide that as a grant to some of these developers. So we're trying to think about, that's a manageable cost for the foundation. And then more importantly, I think what we're trying to push for, especially with the new governor, is like, if we can seed this, is there a way to think about how the state then can scale that? And we can really think about true public-private partnership around some of these areas that are particularly difficult for, affordable housing providers, nonprofit affordable housing developers to create housing. So that's one area that we've been thinking about. Another is just how we use our endowment and our grant making. And so we just made an investment in an organization called ACLU that is using positive rental payments to impact people's credit scores. So if they don't pay their rent on time, it won't impact credit scores, but the positive rental payments will actually improve credit scores. And that then helps people to get on a pathway to home ownership or other things that rely on a good credit score. But what we also want to do with our grant budget is think about whether we can work with some of these landlords to actually have an eviction prevention fund, so that while we're both trying to get people to stay housed, with all this data, we might know when people who might be having 1 month or 2 months where it's difficult to pay rent, but overall would be able to stay in if they just had 1 or 2 months of rental assistance. So we're also thinking about ways we could provide that grant funding for those tenants so that they can stay housed. So it's like trying to put together both opportunities to advance newer ideas around helping folks who have been disconnected to homeownership or pathways to affordable housing, and then thinking about how our grant dollars can sort of supplement that or help with more of the basic needs that are attached to some of those challenges.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to hear.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Amol.
No, please go ahead, Amber.
No, it's great to hear about the work that Dodge is doing in this space and being really creative in their approaches. I think we've got a very similar idea at the Robert Johnson Foundation, and really recognize that philanthropies play a very critical role to use our position and our power for helping to elevate and support models that are working. And that are really aligning housing equity and health so that they can be scaled. But I think one of our powerful tools is we can actually invest in pilots. We can invest in things that are happening on the ground. We can use, as Samra said, grant dollars to do some early thinking, some early learning, and then prime, and this is something we've been doing with our impact investments team, and prime opportunities for impact investments, where we actually have a lot of meaningful resources that we can put out. And to Samra's point, and we can put out for broader generational support because we've got a lot of patience with those impact investments. So I think that's really important. And this is an approach that we have seen with some of our more recent work around community land trusts, bringing in Kensington Corridor, which is a really phenomenal model in Philly, but bringing them in with some grant dollars to help think about how might we scale and replicate that in Trenton through one of our partners, April DeSimone, and her work with Vessi. We've also thinking about how do we, using this really as a sweet spot to bring all of our capital tools and impact investments with strategic grant making to seed and pilot opportunities for investment. We saw that similar approach with the Center for Community Progress, and an organization that's nationally known for their work in land banks, supporting municipalities, helping to think about community land trusts and community land banks. We help them think about how do they look at where's their readiness in our state, and through that early grant, identified work that's happening in the southern part of the state, in Cumberland County, which we're now preparing to scale for a broader impact investments in their community land trust in the region. And so there's some really exciting and powerful examples of how we do this. But I do want to mention that one of the core ways that we think about this work, and we're thinking creatively, is doing our work through a lens of repair. We just heard I just feel like a deep sense of sadness and shame that we should all feel for the conditions in our state that were just described by our colleagues. And when we think about repairing what is broken, thinking about what are the historic harms by both state and local systems, and we're doing that own interrogation at the foundation. Where have we actually perpetuated harm by not centering community voice? Whose interests were ignored? So we're looking at repair along two different spectrums. And all of this really came together last year with the New Jersey Reparations Council report, where they called out ways where across the state, including philanthropy and collaboration with others, can really address New Jersey's history of racist housing policies, exclusion, all the things we've been talking about. And we're really thinking, how can we turn those recommendations into actions? And how can we think about our entire housing strategy and other parts of our strategy with the reparative lens, fixing what is broken? And so I think there's a real opportunity to think about that report and the recommendations as a path to repair. And we're learning. Our partners on this call are learning, and our parts of our housing agenda are already lined up very well with the recommendations from that esteemed body that put that report and blueprint together. And so I think that's really important when we think about this work and ways we can strengthen the systems that we need in our state and preserving the long-term affordability that we need. There's so much repair. And I think there's many ways that we can think about addressing that repair with our resources.
Thank you so much, Amber and Samra, for those answers. I think we can't end this conversation without talking about the Trump administration. There's this whole new environment that we're in with the second administration of President Donald Trump that came in. I know for a fact that my colleagues here that all of your work has been impacted in some way as a result of this new presidential administration. And I open this to everyone, could you share a little bit about how your work has changed starting in 2025 as compared to how it was before?
guess I can
Yeah, please.
jump in on
Yeah.
this. Yeah, there have been significant changes to the work starting in 2025. I think first I want to just say, I think we have all, I think on this panel articulated a vision of housing access and opportunity in this country that really looks to open up opportunity and access for everybody and sets a path to what I guess we would call a progressive view around housing. That is not the plan, intention, or direction that we have seen from this administration. So I think a lot of what we've been faced with in 2025 and now is really about protecting the best practices and approaches that we know work well to help people get into housing and to keep people housed. I will speak just really briefly from the perspective of the work that we do around homelessness in the state. We have seen some significant attacks on the ability to support our homeless systems to support people. And those attacks range from, changing policies around the approaches that are used, moving towards more punitive approaches, requiring people to participate in services, providing temporary short-term supports for people with the expectation that they can figure it out on their own afterwards. So there's been a change in the approach that's been used, but there's also been some real significant challenges and attacks around the funding that's available for these programs in our state. In New Jersey, through the Continuum of Care program that is offered by HUD, that is a large program that we use for homeless services within the state. And I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about this. New Jersey secured about $66 million in HUD funding from the Continuum of Care program in 2024. In 2025, what we saw was a late renewal process, one that threatens projects that are already in operations, and a cap on how much money proposed cap on how much money could be used for the Continuum of Care program. That change would have resulted in us losing about $34 million as a state and about 1,500 households that previously experienced homelessness and now had found stable housing becoming homeless again because they lost their rental assistance support. Thankfully, there were lawsuits that were filed against HUD, and New Jersey's Attorney General was part of 20 other states that filed a lawsuit against HUD on this. And so we did not see that dramatic change, but that is an indication of the direction that HUD is going in. And what we saw is that when they were not able to move forward with these changes through traditional processes like the budget, they then looked to make administrative changes to the program that fundamentally shift how that resource is being used in the community to support people who are experiencing homelessness. So they're moving away from actually providing housing and moving towards temporary supports and services, more punitive approaches, and really taking away the money that we have available in the state. We are not out of the woods yet. One of our current fight is around just maintaining funding for programs that have renewals that already started. The Continuum of Care program is a program that provides funding and rental assistance. 90% of the money that the state uses is for rental assistance. And so programs that started January 1 to June 30th, they don't actually have money to continue paying the rent because HUD has not renewed their projects because the process has been so delayed. They released it late. So those programs are struggling to figure out where they're going to find resources to continue to keep people housed while they wait for HUD to get contracts to them. So it's both these delays and these policy changes that are happening at an administrative level that are going to really impact our ability to effectively support people experiencing homelessness and keep people housed. Those are a couple of things. I could go on, but I'll pause there.
Thank you, Thaisa. Rev. Dobson.
Yeah, I think for me, the shift that is happening is not so much what's happening at the national level, because I'm not convinced that this country has ever really intended for housing for people of color. Let's not fool ourselves, right? Like we're not. This is not a country. Using race to exploit has always been the backbone in this country, right? So for me, I think the shift happens when it's funny, there's something in the chat that someone said, is it better to have incentives as a carrot than a stick? So the other night I was watching The Untouchables with Kevin Costner and Robert De Niro, and Robert De Niro was playing Al Pacino. He said, you can get further with a handshake and a gun than you can with a handshake. So my point is, in America, you need a handshake and the gun. I'm saying, like, this is like, we're not playing. These people aren't playing. They've used violence. They've used, and I'm not advocating violence, that's not what I'm saying. They've used intentional policies to exploit, to destroy, to hamper people of color. So we have a whole litany of great policy ideas. And one of the things that the United Black Agenda is pushing, the faith-based, we have faith institutions that already have land, that already have buildings, that already have the infrastructure. And we know this is going to be a fight. So I'm not going in this with the mindset, oh, let's have the moral argument or the economic argument. No, we have to apply those pressure points that tell these folks we are serious about what we're doing, and we're not going to let you stop. And we see some of the success that's happening in Minnesota. We can't. This country don't listen to carrots. They just don't. There's no history of this country listening to carrots, and that's why. During my tenure and my working with my partner Adam Gordon, we always had to stick. There was no. If you didn't comply with the law, you were going to get sued, and we're coming for you. And so, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be, but I'm just saying, like, we got to stop playing this game and get serious about. That's the thing that drives me nuts about the other side. They're serious about what they're doing. They're methodical. They stay consistent. They don't care about morals. They don't care about none of that stuff. They want their laws passed, and we see the result of it. And so that's when us on this side have to get serious about this stuff and stop playing these games of this illusion like something's going to change with the moral argument. I'm just saying, that's all.
Absolutely. I mean, look, as I tell our team oftentimes, being right on an issue doesn't get you where you need to be, right? Like, just because you think you have the more meritorious argument, that's only a fraction of the battle, right? The rest of it is getting the right answer in the right hands in front of the right people, and making sure that there's a disincentive not to do it, right? Like making sure that there's a political consequence to not doing the thing that you want them to do. So well said. Others on the moment that we're in the Trump administration?
I think one of the things we've seen is just like this purposeful chaos. It's deliberate. It's meant to throw people off, and that's both our nonprofit partners and then obviously, regular everyday citizens. When you're taking away people's basic needs. For Dodge, it's hard to then talk about home ownership or building housing when people don't have food. They might not have, Medicaid. So I think that's been a struggle for us to sort of really try to stay focused on something that is really important and it is a human right, but also think about all these other assaults on people's everyday living. And then I would be remiss, my team would push me on this, is just, lately, I think all of the activity with ICE is another area. Again, it's not directly related to housing conversation per se, but it's just, we have folks who can't even go to work, are afraid to leave their homes, or might not have a home. And so I think for Dodge, again, we're trying to think about how we stay focused to an extent, but also react to the moment that is really one in which all of us have to show up with a little bit of, bravery and a little bit of, collaboration to work in opposition to what we're seeing from the federal government.
Yeah.
Summer is directly related to housing. That is directly related to housing. I just wanted to throw that in there. You're right on target, and we all should be seeing that. This is directly related to housing.
Absolutely, 100%. Adam,
yeah, no, I was just gonna say. I mean, Summer, I mean, hit the nail on the head in terms of the chaos, and I think I want to give a couple of particular examples. I mean, there's a lot we could say. There's a couple of particular examples of how that chaos creates uncertainty and housing instability. And one, in terms of immigration, is there's this thing, and there was this announcement at the end of last week by HUD, right, that says well, we figured out there's all these people who aren't eligible to live in public housing, and we're going to threaten their housing stability. Now, to be clear, I mean, it has been the case through every administration, that people who don't have legal immigration status don't receive federal assistance. That's already the law. We can debate whether that's a good law or not, and we could thank President Clinton for signing that law. But what they're trying to do is create uncertainty around whether, if you're a mixed status household, you can stay in your house, and that is not the law. But it's sort of consistent with a lot else that we've seen from the administration, which is that, they're sort of saying these things. It's not what the law actually is, but they're kind of daring people to challenge it. And they're also creating fear and uncertainty so that if you see that headline and you're in a mixed status family, you're like, wow, maybe I better, leave before ICE comes and gets me, because now they know where I am. And that is absolutely, the chaos is kind of the point, and the terrorizing people is the point. Another thing that I saw in the question, in one of the questions that I answered before, is the stuff around Section 8. They are trying to get rid of Section 8. And like someone asking the questions like, what can you do to replace Section 8? I mean, you can't. I mean, Section 8 is, this bedrock, really important housing program. We don't have enough money for it. There's no way to replace. And they want to cut it by over 40%. They want to make it so people are kicked off after a certain amount of time. And what's going to replace that? There's nothing that replaces that. And again, it's sort of like that hasn't actually happened. And in fact, there's the bill that's currently may or may not pass Congress based on whether it can be separated from funding ICE, actually increases money for Section 8. But, the headline is like, we're getting rid of Section 8. And so I've been on a number of calls with, community leaders. Like, they're like, we're hearing from landlords, they're going to take out, they're going to force people out with Section 8, even before the policy has actually changed. And it's sort of like, these people talk about this abhorrent idea of like self-deportation. They're trying to get people to like get out of their homes, you know, before the policy change or legal change actually happens. And that is the point of, of having this policy of chaos. And it's abhorrent. And it's something we all have to band together to make sure people understand what's actually going on, what their rights are, which so many people, and particularly, I really appreciate the ACLU's leadership in this arena and everyone on this call.
In the interest of time, Dewan, yeah, please go ahead. Say you unmute.
Yeah, no, I'll be very brief. I think, this moment also shows the importance and the need for states to step up in the midst of, the federal attacks that we're seeing. We need, the leaders of the state to also be brave enough to say that we won't allow this to happen here. We won't allow this occupation to happen here. We won't allow you to target, vulnerable people here. I think that's the first part, is that, we need to make sure that there's that, buy-in and commitment from state leaders to kind of be a wall of defense against these federal actions that we're seeing. The second part is simply, I follow what Ella Baker said, in that we have to make the struggle every single day. And so that means for each of us as individuals, I think the charge is to find a way that we can serve as an interruption to what we are seeing and what's happening. I mentioned that I was heartened by the way that folks showed up in Patterson and in Summit. I'm also heartened by the way that folks have shown up in Minneapolis and other places, and the way that folks showed up here in Newark when it came to Delaney Hall and across the state of New Jersey. My great grandmother, who I mentioned earlier in the call, Annie, she had a song. Her favorite song just simply said, "Whatever you do," and the original lyrics are, "Whatever you do for Jesus, let it be real." But the core of that is, whatever work you do, let it be real. And to Reverend Dobson's point, I think I say it differently. I say, if we can't be serious, can we at least be for real? And so we have to ground ourselves in the seriousness of this moment, and find ways, like I said, that we can show up and be an interruption to systems that seek to do harm, and really do the work of preserving and protecting humanity.
No, appreciate that.
Just wanted to say one quick
yeah.
thing, Amol, and then I can, yeah, I think just to Dewan's point about what's happening in our state, I do hope, and I'm sensing a sense of optimism. I know it's early, but a sense of optimism about what could be done under this current administration and what's already happening in this body and in the actors that I see represented in this chat. I'm really hoping there's an opportunity to seize our collective power, pulling out whatever the tools are that we need amidst the chaos and the challenge and what we're experiencing now. So I'm hoping there might be a promising moment for the sector that we can capitalize on.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I tried to weave in some of the questions that I was seeing in the chat, some of the questions that were received before as people had RSVP'd. There's one question that perhaps, maybe it's two questions that I should have probably asked at the beginning, which is, what do we actually mean by affordable? And the second question is, how much affordable housing are we talking about, right? For either of those questions, is there a formula or a metric or anything like that? So, Adam, maybe we could start with you. Is there some insight that you might have that you could share about what we mean when we say affordable?
Well, it means different things to different people, and it's the $1 million question, because at the end of the day, if it's not actually affordable, in reality, to your point, Dawn, about keeping it for real, then it doesn't matter what we're calling it. And so, what we tend to say is if people are paying more than about 30% of their income for housing, it's not affordable. That's a baseline measure, and of course that's going to vary by income. That's going to vary. Summer was talking about before about all the different places in the state she's talking about, and like what people's income are in Atlantic City is a lot different from what people's income are in a lot of North Jersey. And so what it means for affordable housing programs, it varies a lot. And the reason it varies a lot, frankly, it's partly because it used to be based on that standard. And starting in the Reagan administration, when we got cuts to federal housing programs, we got progressively more and more expensive things called affordable housing, because guess what? It's cheaper to call something affordable housing that's less truly affordable. And so what we have now is sort of an alphabet soup of different programs that have affordability at different levels. And one of the things we try to do at Fair Share is continue to push down the levels of affordability everywhere. And I see some comments that are absolutely right. You have places in which you have a formula that's based on levels that aren't actually affordable to people in a city like Newark. Like, it's something that really we try to really it should be that 30% of the income standard, but in practice, what it means in terms of affordable housing, you have to read the fine print.
And I guess, is there a number of affordable housing units that we need in New Jersey? Like, is there a goal that you have in mind when you think about what an ideal world would look like? Maybe I can go to Thaisa for some of that, and anybody else that wants to chime in.
Sure, I will just mention that the National Low-Income Coalition, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, it's a national group that does research and work around affordable housing across the country. They put out 2 reports every year, the Out of Reach report and the Gap report, where they really drill down in each state how many units of housing are available that are affordable to people at 30% of area median income, at 50% of area median income. I realize that some of those numbers mean nothing to folks, but essentially what housing is available that is affordable to people that are extremely low income, just above the poverty line, people who are making minimum wage, and they really drill down what's available in each state. Their report identifies that New Jersey, for a couple of years now, has had a shortage of 200 plus units. I think we're closer to 250, maybe 300,000 units that are affordable to people that have extremely low incomes. And so what that means is for every 100 households, for example, for every 100 households that are extremely low income, there are about 31 available apartments or homes that they can afford. We are never going to get to a space where everybody has access when we're that much out of whack in terms of what's available for folks. So, you know, the National Low Income Housing Coalition's numbers, I think, are the primary numbers that we typically look at to understand what the shortage is and the gap is that we have to make up to get to housing affordability. And I just want to make one really quick statement, you know, with, you know, New Jersey's increasing minimum wage, but with our average fair market rent in the state, a single person would have to earn about $70,000 a year in order to comfortably afford a one-bedroom apartment in the state. For anybody who's earning the current minimum wage, they're earning $35,000, $40,000 maybe. Those numbers don't match up. And not to mention that there are many families, single parent families, that are earning minimum wage on a single income and need to house more than one person. And so we have to get to a space where the income that people are earning matches up with the cost of housing, and we are not there yet. The gap is too big. And so when we talk about creating affordable housing, we have to think about how we're creating deeply affordable housing at all income levels.
Well said. Thank you for that. So in our remaining minutes, I would love for the panel to, in a minute or so, share with us some action steps. What can people do to get involved either in their communities at the local level, at the hyper-local level, in their municipalities, at the state level, or at the federal level? What can people do to get involved in the struggle for creating more affordable housing and creating a New Jersey or a country that is more affordable for people who are perhaps the most vulnerable? I don't want to call on anybody first, but I'm going to keep my question framing going so that you have a second to think about what it is that you're going to say. But what is it that folks can do to get involved in the work, perhaps with your organization, or with some other effort that you know about that's happening in the state or in the country? Who wants to go first?
I guess I'll go.
Yeah, please.
I think the United Black Agenda is really focusing on opportunity for New Jersey. That the new frontier of housing, affordable housing, is really utilizing faith-based opportunities, land. Here's the thing. Every town does a master plan, and usually the master plan doesn't include faith institutions. Faith institutions are a trusted entity in the town that really serves as an economic engine. So to get at those 200,000 units that Thaisa and Adam talks about, we're talking about existing land, existing buildings that already has the infrastructure. So we can really expedite the process of getting at, you know, affordable housing in New Jersey, utilizing the existing land for faith institutions and some nonprofit institutions. That, I mean, we're a very diverse religious community in this state. Can you imagine if these faith institutions had the opportunity to build, and we're not talking about massive development, we're talking about anywhere from 30 to 40, or maybe at max 100 units of affordable housing. And this is something that's doable. But again, it's going to take some pressure points to really make sure that the action to do nothing costs more than to doing what we're trying to do. And we're talking about political pressure, we're talking about political power, like, and this is where, you know, this myth of home rule, it exists in concept, but not in law, to allow faith institutions to really utilize the land for their mission, what they were intended to do to meet the needs of their community. And that's something I you know, and I'm gonna close about this. That's something that the next frontier of affordable housing, really faith-based development. As you can see, a lot of folks are jumping on the bandwagon now, and I've been doing this for 30 years. Now everybody's doing seminars around faith-based development, but I'll stop there. But we need to get this done.
Thank you. Dewan, can I turn to you? What can people do to get involved?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a few things. One is get to know your neighbors. I think we're living in a time where folks want to see us isolated. They want to see us not showing up for each other. Get to know your neighbors. And where folks may see a stranger, see a neighbor. Where there's a need, meet it. To the extent possible, we have to show up for each other. And I think that is critically important now more than ever. But in terms of my role as policy counsel, I think the recommendation is to be involved, tap into the advocacy that's taking place. Keep an eye on your city council. Watch what they're up to. There's a rent leveling board. Watch what they're up to. Be active in those conversations. And yeah, both on the local level and at the state level. There are a lot of bills related to housing that came up last year, some good, some bad, and making sure that we're showing up in numbers and in force to really show lawmakers where we stand on an issue, whether it be in support or in opposition, but making that known. And yeah, I think the best thing we can do right now is organize and advocate.
I would say, similarly, just like talk about it to everybody. I think the problem, and I say this as a New Jersey native, we kind of think of like, oh, at least we're not Oklahoma and we're not Mississippi and we're so great. But actually, like talking about the racial wealth gap, talking about the inequity that exists in our state, I think is important to sort of hold everyone's feet to the fire, that we, just because we live in a so-called blue state doesn't mean that we're absolved of kind of promoting some of this inequity. I've seen in the chat, I think it's actually worse sometimes that we feel like we're better than others, and we don't have to think about it in such a way. So I think the more we can talk about it and make people realize, like, this is bad. This is New Jersey. We're like we have the third worst racial wealth gap in the nation. And sort of, dare I say, shame people a little bit to care. And I think the more you can talk about it, and then to Duan's point, start at the local level, like engage in local politics, local policy, show up at meetings for city council. I think we just need to do more of that and create a sense of urgency among everybody, not just the advocates and not just nonprofits and foundations, but every kind of citizen of New Jersey thinking that this is something we really need to tackle if we care.
One of the things that's striking about New Jersey, in terms of what like some were just saying about showing up, and we're really like very small numbers of people make tremendous amounts of change in this state. Like I remember the first big organizing campaign that I worked on at Fair Share, which is how Reverend Dobson and I first met, which was getting rid of this practice where wealthy towns could buy out of their Mount Laurel obligations. We had 250 people show up in a state of 9+ million people at the State House. And they called the state police on us because they were freaked out about it. Individual zoning meetings and town meetings. I mean, if you show up with 20 people, like they've never seen that in most places. And so it really is that like organizing, as Dewan was saying, banding together with neighbors. Someone put in the chat about tenants unions, banding together with fellow tenants, like all these things, like though we're a really big state, in a lot of cases, in reality, it doesn't take a lot of people to band together. And anyone on this, if you don't know where to start, reach out to anyone. Anyone on this can like help you say where in your communities are the people working on people on places, who's a good connection in Essex County and Mercer County and Newark and Atlantic City, because I mean, there's a lot of people who are trying to organize people and show up. And so I'll end with one anecdote. We had a huge fight. Actually, you could see it going up now. This redevelopment next to the Princeton Junction train station. The same 15 people showed up at every meeting opposed to it. We figured out. We worked with unions. We worked with local community groups. We showed up with 30 people and we flipped the vote. And there are now going to be 160 affordable homes that are in the middle of being constructed as a result. And like you just, you don't need a lot of people to make change in New Jersey.
I want to just echo what everybody has said, and really it is important to recognize that this housing crisis that we're in starts at the local level to dig us out of it. So it does mean that we all have to be prepared to show up, to kind of leave the comfort of our homes. I know that we all, have long days, we work, we're tired, we want to come home and relax, but it does require us to bear a little bit more discomfort and attend that city council meeting that goes till 2 a.m. in the morning, or maybe not till 2 a.m., but attend the city council meeting, attend the zoning board, join your zoning board, join your planning board, because it is really about the local people who are participating in the process that make the difference of what actually gets built and what actually moves in your community. And like Adam mentioned, like many folks here have mentioned, it is a very small handful that can sway things in a different direction. And because they are so loud, there's this sense that everybody is against. But we all collectively know that there are far more people in support of creating housing opportunities for many more and creating affordable housing at different levels. And so we all have to be involved in our local communities. And I'd also encourage you, everybody, to reach out to the organizations here, understand what advocacy campaigns there are, get involved, reach out to your state legislator, reach out to your congressional representative, and just talk about how important housing affordability is to you, so that they understand those vocal advocates that are against this work are not the only folks that are in this space, and that there's a far greater number of people that are engaged and committed to making sure that housing is available for everybody.
Amber,
I'll just add in, yeah, no, thank you so much. I'll just add in, I mean, these are such great action steps and suggestions. I would add that I think we do want to figure out where are the local movements and how can we support them, and what's the infrastructure that we need to support the leaders on this call and the teams that are supporting them, and making room for more leadership in the state. There's a lot of work to be done, as we've heard. We need as much as we can do to support a coordinated effort that makes room to support these leaders and the next generation of leaders at all levels. And lastly, I'll just say we're very interested in how do we, as we think about funding local movements, how do we shift the narrative? What do we need to know? What stories do we need to tell the narrative that doesn't allow room for all of the disparaging things we've heard that have created so much chaos? And so I think, we're interested in what are the stories we need to tell, and who do we need to talk to tell those stories more effectively, and how can we support that?
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. We need folks to call their lawmakers, be real with them. We need to get to know our neighbors. We need to make sure that we show up in collective action and in community with one another. We need to sit on our community zoning boards. One of the most thankless things that one could do, but one of the most crucial things that one could do. So take that job, be an advocate in your community. Once again, to close out the conversation, I'll invoke the poet Mia X and say we need to co-create the care. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you again to our friends at NJPAC for making this possible. And I'll turn it back to Donna, I believe, with my great appreciation for you and your leadership, and of course everybody on this panel. Thank you so much to the audience as well for tuning in. Back to you, Don.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Panel, you were superb. Oh my goodness. This was like this master class. I couldn't write fast enough. Well, thank you for sharing such important insights and action steps. The whole purpose of Standing in Solidarity is to prepare our community to take action and to be change makers. And you absolutely fulfilled that this evening. So thank you so much. And Amol, of course, all of this happens under your careful attention and creative curation. So thank you again. I wanted to just remind everyone of our audience that we also have a membership campaign at NJPAC. We welcome you to join us and help support so many of our social impact initiatives in particular. But February 23rd is our next Standing in Solidarity. It will be in person, provided the weather cooperates. And the theme will be celebrating the Divine Nine, celebrating our Black sororities and fraternities and their outstanding impact on communities that they're making in New Jersey and around the country. So it's going to be a really informative discussion. They'll have resource tables, information about their great work, and we hope you can join us. That's February 23rd at 6 p.m. And of course, in JPAC, we have shows. We have hundreds of shows. So I'd like to just remind everyone, we have a Drumline February 8th. which will be a really wonderful performance. We have Arts Exchange, Newark Real Stories on January